The darkness swallowed everything at 02:21 hours that October morning in 1943. Black water stretched between the Solomon Islands. Through this void cut a Japanese destroyer. Her name was Amagiri, 2,090 tons of steel slicing through phosphorescent water at 30 knots. The wake glowed behind her like a comet's tail. Commander Kohei Hanami gripped the bridge rail. Confidence filled every breath he took. His vessel represented everything superior about Imperial Navy engineering. 400 feet of precision craftsmanship. 6 5-inch guns bristled from her decks. 16 torpedo tubes waited in their mounts. This was naval power incarnate. 800 yards away, something else moved through the night. 80 feet of plywood and mahogany. 3 engines screaming toward maximum throttle. The Americans had designated her PT-109. Japanese sailors used different words. Akuma, no Hayabusa, devils, falcons. 90 seconds would shatter everything the Imperial Japanese Navy believed about small craft warfare. 3 Packard engines would rewrite the rules of naval combat forever. The transformation hadn't begun with victory. It started with blood and miscalculation. 18 months earlier, the waters off Bataan had become a killing field. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3 fought desperately against impossible odds. Lieutenant Commander John Volkley commanded 6 PT boats. Their mission seemed simple: evacuate personnel before the Philippine surrender became final. Japanese destroyers waited in the darkness. The 5th Destroyer Squadron operated under Captain Raizo Tanaka's command. These veterans expected slow targets, predictable movements, easy kills. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented. 77 feet of mahogany hull powered by automotive engineering genius. 3 Packard 4M 2500 engines generated 1,350 horsepower each. Official Navy records documented combat speeds of 41 knots, faster than any destroyer in the Japanese fleet could manage under combat conditions. But speed alone couldn't guarantee survival. Early PT boats carried Mark 8 torpedoes, weapons designed for submarine warfare. Their depth settings made surface attacks nearly impossible. Minimum arming distances prevented close-range shots. Unreliable detonators turned direct hits into harmless impacts. Navy Bureau of Ordnance documents revealed devastating statistics. Through mid-1942, PT boat torpedo success rates remained below 10%. Most launches resulted in complete misses. Those that found targets often failed to explode. Japanese naval intelligence studied these early encounters carefully. Captured intelligence reports showed their conclusions. PT boats represented nuisance weapons only, fast but fundamentally ineffective. They lacked firepower to threaten capital ships. Even destroyers could defeat them easily. Captain Tommy Ichihara commanded destroyer Amatsukaze during several 1942 engagements. His action reports survive in captured documents. The enemy motorboats achieve high speed but cannot maintain accuracy while maneuvering. Their torpedoes pass harmlessly when we execute standard evasion procedures. This assessment would prove catastrophically wrong. But not because of any single breakthrough. American PT boat effectiveness evolved through systematic changes. Tactics improved. Training intensified. Weapons integration reached new levels. Japanese naval intelligence failed to detect these changes until far too late. The Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron Training Center at Melville, Rhode Island, became the crucible of transformation. Every combat report since Pearl Harbor received analysis. Patterns emerged by August 1942. PT boats succeeded when exploiting speed and darkness. They failed attempting conventional torpedo attacks. Lieutenant Commander Robert Montgomery served as Chief Training Officer at Melville. His September 1942 memorandum outlined revolutionary doctrine. The slash attack became standard procedure. High-speed approaches from unexpected angles. Torpedo launches under 500 yards. Immediate withdrawal at maximum speed. Perfect coordination became essential. Boat commanders worked with torpedo men and engine operators. At 40 knots, a PT boat covered 68 feet per second. Commanders had perhaps 3 seconds to identify targets. Calculate firing solutions. Launch torpedoes. The engagement window closed faster than human reflexes. Japanese destroyer captains trained in conventional surface warfare. They expected torpedo attacks from predictable angles. Ranges of 2,000 to 5,000 yards represented normal combat distances. Standard doctrine assumed destroyer versus destroyer engagements. They had no tactical framework for vessels closing to knife-fighting range. Launching torpedoes from darkness. Vanishing before defensive fire could coordinate. Their training had no answers for such unconventional warfare. By late 1942, American PT boat squadrons implemented Montgomery's new tactics across the Pacific. Japanese commanders were about to discover their intelligence assessments were based on obsolete data. The technological revolution enabling PT boat supremacy began in Detroit. Automotive engineers had spent the 1930s perfecting high-performance marine engines. Unlimited hydroplane racing demanded unprecedented power-to-weight ratios. The Packard Motor Car Company entered marine engine development in 1939. They converted aircraft engine technology for naval use. The resulting 4M 2500 engine represented a quantum leap in marine propulsion. Packard's wartime production records document extensive technical specifications. Each engine displaced 2,500 cubic inches, generated 1,350 horsepower at 2,400 RPM. 3 engines driving 3 propeller shafts created 4,050 combined horsepower. An 80-foot hull weighing 56 tons fully loaded achieved unprecedented power-to-weight ratios. Japanese destroyers like the Fubuki class achieved 34 knots. They required 50,000 horsepower to push 2,090 tons. This provided roughly 24 horsepower per ton. PT boats generated 72 horsepower per ton, triple the destroyer ratio. Raw power meant nothing without proper hull design. Elko Naval Division and Higgins Industries developed hulls capable of harnessing this power effectively. Navy hydrodynamic testing at the David Taylor Model Basin documented revolutionary characteristics. PT boat hulls achieved planing configuration at 23 knots. Water resistance dropped dramatically. At full throttle, the bow lifted 15 degrees. Wetted surface area reduced by nearly 40%. 3-point planing surfaces created aerodynamic lift. 2 sponsors and the keel partially supported hull weight. At 41 knots, approximately 30% of boat weight was supported by dynamic lift rather than displacement. Japanese naval architects possessed no equivalent technology. Their destroyers remained displacement hulls limited by hydrodynamic laws governing wave-making resistance. Physics created immutable barriers. Displacement hull maximum speed equals roughly 1.34 times the square root of waterline length in feet. For a 400-foot destroyer, theoretical maximum speed was approximately 27 knots. Exceeding this required exponentially more power. The Fubuki class achieved 34 knots by installing engines generating nearly double the power required for displacement speed. This came at tremendous cost in fuel consumption and mechanical reliability. PT boats operated under different physics entirely. As planing hulls, they escaped displacement speed limitations. Maximum speed depended only on available power and structural integrity to withstand hydrodynamic forces. 3 Packard engines were controlled independently. This allowed unprecedented maneuverability by varying throttle settings. PT boat commanders could execute turns at speeds that would capsize conventional vessels. Combat reports document 90-degree turns completed in under 200 yards, while maintaining speeds above 30 knots. Japanese destroyer captains executing evasive maneuvers at 30 knots required 2,000 yards to complete similar turns. A PT boat could cut inside a destroyer's turning circle while maintaining higher speed. This tactical advantage made conventional surface warfare doctrine obsolete when facing these unconventional opponents. The Mark 13 torpedo, introduced in mid-1943, finally gave PT boats weapons matching their platform capabilities. Unlike the earlier Mark 8, the Mark 13 was designed for air launch from low altitude. It was adapted for high-speed surface launch. The weapon could be safely dropped at speeds up to 110 knots. It armed within 300 yards. Perfect specifications for PT boat/attacks. The tactical revolution reached full maturity in waters around New Georgia during summer 1943. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 9 operated under Lieutenant Commander Robert Kelly's command. They had been developing techniques in the Solomon Islands since June. Blackett Strait presented unique challenges. Japanese destroyer runs occurred with predictable regularity every 3 to 4 nights. Imperial Navy destroyers would race down the slot at maximum speed. They delivered supplies and reinforcements to isolated garrisons. Withdrawal came before dawn. These runs typically involved 4 to 6 destroyers. They moved at 28 to 30 knots in single-file formation. Japanese commanders considered their speed and firepower sufficient protection against any threat. PT boats had occasionally attempted interceptions. Results through early 1943 remained marginal at best. Kelly's innovation was abandoning single-boat attacks entirely. Squadron 9 developed coordinated section tactics. 3 boats operating as a unified strike package. The lead boat served as target illuminator. The second as primary attacker. The third as backup and rescue vessel. Communication between boats relied on TBS radio. Talk between ships operated on frequencies Japanese forces couldn't monitor. Navy communications logs from July 1943 show PT boats coordinating attacks with precision impossible in earlier operations. Attack sequences followed rigid protocol documented in Squadron 9's tactical manual. Boats positioned themselves along likely destroyer routes hours before expected enemy arrival. Engines idled at minimum RPM to reduce noise and wake visibility. Radar SCR 517 units, installed on selected boats beginning in May 1943, provided early warning at ranges up to 12,000 yards. When radar contact confirmed destroyer approach, PT boats separated to attack positions 2,000 yards apart. This created a gauntlet the enemy must pass through. The lead boat would illuminate targets using handheld searchlights only after the section commander judged geometry favorable, typically when destroyers were broadside to multiple attack vectors. Illumination lasted exactly 5 seconds. In that window, attacking boats would acquire targets visually, calculate firing solutions, launch torpedoes. The Mark 13's gyro-stabilized guidance system allowed launches during violent maneuvering, a capability the earlier Mark 8 lacked entirely. Japanese destroyer commanders faced impossible decisions in those critical seconds. Searchlight illumination destroyed their night vision. Turning toward the light meant presenting beam aspect to torpedoes already in the water. Maintaining course meant continuing into the kill zone. Increasing speed meant reducing maneuverability. The mathematics favored the attackers completely. A destroyer at 30 knots covered 51 feet per second. A Mark 13 torpedo At 33 knots, covered 56 feet per second. At 500-yard launch range, time to impact was approximately 27 seconds. Insufficient time for effective evasion, even if the destroyer captain identified the threat immediately. Lieutenant Bartholomew Connolly commanded PT-157. He documented the new tactic's effectiveness in his August 2, 1943 action report. His section engaged 2 Kagero-class destroyers in Blackett Strait. 3 torpedoes launched. 2 hits observed. 1 destroyer, later identified as Hagikaze, severely damaged and forced to withdraw at reduced speed. Japanese casualties 47 killed. Destroyer out of action for 6 weeks of repairs. American casualties 0. Connolly's section returned to base having expended less than 1,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition and 3 torpedoes. Japanese destroyer crews were veterans of victories from Pearl Harbor to the Java Sea. They found themselves confronting a form of warfare their training had never anticipated. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the physical threat. Commander Toshio Abe captained destroyer Mikazuki. He provided detailed testimony during post-war interrogations conducted by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey. His account, preserved in National Archives records, reveals complete collapse of Japanese confidence when facing PT boat tactics. We expected torpedo attacks from submarines or enemy destroyers. Abe testified, "We had procedures. Trained responses. But these small boats, they came from darkness with impossible speed. Our lookouts would report engine sounds. Then, nothing. 30 seconds later, searchlights. Torpedoes already launched. No time to process information. No time to respond according to doctrine." The Japanese Navy's Tactical Manual for Destroyer Operations dedicated 17 pages to anti-submarine warfare. 12 pages covered destroyer versus destroyer combat. PT boat threats received 3 paragraphs. All based on early war encounters when American tactics remained undeveloped. Imperial Navy training assumed small craft would attack from predictable bearings at ranges allowing defensive maneuver. The reality of coordinated section attacks from multiple vectors at knife-fighting range had no place in their tactical framework. Radio intercepts decoded by Fleet Radio Unit Pacific documented growing crisis in Japanese destroyer commander confidence. August 7, 1943, transmission requested air cover for supply run. Enemy motorboats increasingly aggressive. August 15, transmission stated cannot guarantee delivery schedule. Motorboat threat requires reduced speed, extended transit time. August 23 recommended suspension of destroyer runs until motorboat threat neutralized. The admission that destroyers required protection from plywood boats represented a psychological reversal Japanese commanders found deeply disturbing. Their warrior culture emphasized offense, aggressive action, contempt for defensive thinking. Yet here were destroyer captains requesting air cover, demanding intelligence on PT boat positions before accepting missions. In some cases, refusing assignments entirely when PT boat presence was confirmed. Lieutenant Commander Hanami's report following the October 6th engagement provides insight into psychological deterioration. The enemy boat appeared without warning at extreme close range. Speed appeared to exceed 40 knots. Despite maximum evasion, torpedo track observed passing 15 meters from stern. Second boat attacked from port quarter, while attention focused on first threat. Third boat observed but lost in darkness before defensive fire could be directed. Hanami's report concludes with unprecedented candor. Current destroyer tactics ineffective against coordinated motorboat attacks. Recommend convoy escort priority over supply runs until effective countermeasures developed. The Japanese Navy never developed those countermeasures. Their destroyers, designed for conventional surface warfare, lacked the sensors, weapons, and maneuverability to counter fast-moving small craft operating in darkness. Attempts to modify tactics failed completely, increasing lookout coverage, implementing zigzag patterns, assigning destroyers specifically to anti-PT boat screening. All failed to restore the security Japanese commanders had taken for granted. By September 1943, Tokyo Express runs that once occurred every 3 days had been reduced to weekly operations. Then, bi-weekly. The PT boats hadn't stopped the runs entirely, but they had made them costly, unpredictable, and psychologically intolerable for crews who once considered themselves masters of Pacific waters. The surrender of initiative marked a turning point Japanese leadership recognized but could not reverse. November 2, 1943. The waters between Guadalcanal and Tulagi had earned their nickname honestly. Iron Bottom Sound. Dozens of vessels rested on the sea floor following 2 years of savage naval combat. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 15 was about to add to that count. Lieutenant William Liebenau commanded a section of 4 PT boats positioned along the expected route of a Japanese reinforcement run. Intelligence from Coast Watcher stations indicated 4 destroyers would attempt to deliver supplies to Villa Plantation on Kolombangara Island. The destroyer group Yudachi, Samidare, Shiratsuyu, and Murasame departed Rabaul at 1800 hours, maintaining formation speed of 28 knots. Captain Masami Fujita, commanding the group aboard Yudachi, had experience with PT boat operations. His action plan included continuous zigzag pattern and assignment of Murasame as rearguard specifically to counter small craft threats. Liebenau's section had been tracking the formation via radar since 2130 hours. By 2245, the destroyers had entered the engagement zone. A 3-mile strait between 2 small islands, where maneuver room was limited, and PT boats had positioned themselves on both flanks. The attack commenced at 2251 hours. PT 167, commanded by Lieutenant Edward Crandler, illuminated Yudachi from 600 yards. The searchlight beam caught the destroyer in a turn, presenting perfect beam aspect. Crandler launched 2 Mark 13 torpedoes at 225215. Simultaneously, PT 183 under Lieutenant Gordon Gibson attacked Samidare from the opposite flank. The coordinated assault from different bearings created exactly the tactical dilemma Japanese doctrine couldn't resolve. Responding to one threat meant ignoring the other. Yudachi's lookouts spotted torpedo wakes at 225230, 15 seconds after launch. Captain Fujita ordered hard right rudder and flank speed. Standard evasion doctrine. The turn brought Yudachi onto a heading that placed her directly in the path of PT 183's torpedoes initially aimed at Samidare. The first Mark 13 struck Yudachi at frame 85, approximately 1/3 of her length from the bow. The 600-pound Torpex warhead detonated against the forward magazine. Secondary explosions followed immediately as stored ammunition ignited. Post-war analysis of Japanese damage reports indicates the explosion was catastrophic. Yudachi's bow section separated completely. Her forward superstructure collapsed. Fire spread throughout the ship within 90 seconds. A second torpedo from PT 167's salvo struck amidships at 225310, penetrating the engine room. With both boilers destroyed and flooding uncontrollable, Yudachi began listing heavily to port. Samidare attempted to render assistance, but came under attack from PT 195. 2 torpedoes missed, but the threat forced Samidare's captain to abandon rescue operations. The remaining destroyers withdrew at maximum speed, leaving Yudachi and her crew to their fate. The destroyer capsized at 2317 hours and sank in 240 fathoms of water. Of her 228 crew members, 127 were lost. The survivors rescued by subsequent American operations provided detailed accounts of the attack that confirmed PT boat tactical superiority. The engagement had lasted 26 minutes from first illumination to Yudachi's sinking. 4 PT boats had eliminated a destroyer displacing 40 times their combined weight, inflicted over 100 casualties, forced 3 additional destroyers to abandon their mission, all without sustaining damage or casualties. The success of PT boat operations rested not merely on tactical innovation or technological superiority. It depended on industrial capacity that Japanese forces could never match. By late 1943, American shipyards were producing PT boats at rates that turned individual vessels into expendable tactical assets. Elko Naval Division's Bayonne, New Jersey facility reached peak production in October 1943. They completed one 80-foot PT boat every 4 days. Higgins Industries in New Orleans maintained similar output. Combined production exceeded 70 boats per month, more than the entire Japanese destroyer construction rate. The economics were staggering. Bureau of Ships records document that a PT boat cost approximately $250,000 to construct, roughly 1/40th the cost of a Fletcher-class destroyer. In the time required to build a single destroyer, American industry could produce 40 PT boats. More significantly, PT boat construction required no specialized facilities. The mahogany hulls could be assembled in any large boat yard. Packard engines came from automotive assembly lines requiring minimal conversion for marine use. Torpedoes, guns, and electronics represented the only truly specialized components. This industrial reality created tactical flexibility Japanese commanders found impossible to counter. Losing a destroyer meant losing 2 years of specialized construction effort, hundreds of trained crew members, irreplaceable industrial capacity. Losing a PT boat meant losing a crew of 12 to 14 men and a vessel that could be replaced within a month. The casualty mathematics favored aggressive PT boat tactics. Squadron commanders could accept boat losses that would be unthinkable for larger vessels because replacements arrived continuously. Lieutenant Commander Preston Franklin, operations officer for Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron South Pacific, articulated this calculus in a November 1943 memorandum. "We can trade boats for destroyers at any ratio and win. If we lose 3 PT boats sinking 1 destroyer, we've gained strategically. The enemy cannot replace the destroyer. We can replace the boats in 12 days. Japanese industrial capacity, already strained by 2 years of warfare, could not implement equivalent programs. Their destroyers remained the product of specialized naval yards requiring 18 to 24 months per vessel. Small craft development had been neglected entirely. The Imperial Navy had no PT boat equivalent. Attempts to develop countermeasures faced insurmountable obstacles. Radar systems capable of detecting small surface contacts remained beyond Japanese electronic capabilities. High-speed patrol craft required engines Japanese industry couldn't produce in quantity. Weapon systems for engaging fast-moving small targets needed fire control computers that didn't exist. By December 1943, U.S. Navy PT boat strength in the South Pacific exceeded 150 vessels organized into 12 squadrons. Japanese destroyer strength had declined to approximately 40 vessels operational in the same theater. Those 40 were increasingly reluctant to operate in waters where PT boats prowled. The industrial imbalance created a tactical reality where American commanders could deploy PT boats with near impunity, while Japanese destroyer captains operated under constant threat they couldn't effectively counter. Admiral William Halsey, Commander South Pacific Force, recognized this advantage explicitly. His December 15, 1943 operational directive stated PT boat squadrons will maintain aggressive night patrols in all enemy transit areas. Destroyer operations are authorized to proceed without concern for PT boat losses. Industrial capacity ensures replacement exceeds attrition. The directive formalized what had become operational reality. American industrial might had transformed small wooden boats into capital ship killers that could be traded freely in exchange for strategic advantage. Behind the statistics of destroyed destroyers and successful engagements lay a human reality that Navy reports rarely captured. The men who operated PT boats at 40 knots through darkness faced dangers that extended far beyond enemy fire. Seaman Joseph Branham served aboard PT 127. He kept a personal diary throughout his deployment to the South Pacific. His entries, donated to the Naval Historical Center in 1987, provide intimate details absent from official records. November 18, 1943. Lost Jenkins last night. Boat took a 5-inch shell during withdrawal from engagement. Shell passed clean through the engine room. Jenkins was checking fuel pressure when it hit. Boat commander said death was instantaneous. We wrapped what remained in canvas and buried him at sea this morning. He was 19 years old. Joined the Navy because he wanted to see the Pacific. He saw it. The wooden hulls that gave PT boats their speed offered virtually no protection against enemy fire. A single shell from a destroyer's 5-inch guns could pass through both sides of a PT boat without detonating. But the shrapnel and splinters created by such hits proved devastating to crew members. Medical records from Navy hospital ships in the South Pacific documented injuries unique to PT boat warfare. High-speed impacts with debris or waves caused spinal compression injuries. Engine room personnel suffered hearing loss from prolonged exposure to 3 Packard engines running at maximum RPM in confined spaces. Burns from fuel fires occurred with tragic frequency. Gasoline-soaked mahogany hulls ignited easily and burned intensely. The psychological burden proved equally severe. PT boat commanders were typically junior officers. Lieutenants or lieutenant commanders, many not yet 25 years old. They made life-and-death decisions affecting their crew and engaged enemy vessels worth hundreds of times their own boat's value. Lieutenant Commander Robert Work Squadron, psychiatrist assigned to motor torpedo boat squadrons, South Pacific, documented combat stress patterns unique to PT boat crews. His October 1944 report noted, "These men operate under sustained high stress. Unlike destroyer crews with hundreds of shipmates, PT boat sailors form intensely close bonds with their 12-man crews. The loss of a single crew member affects the entire boat profoundly. Additionally, the intimate nature of their attacks engaging enemies close enough to see faces creates psychological burdens absent in long-range warfare. Japanese destroyer sailors faced their own psychological torment. Survivor testimonies collected during post-war interrogations revealed men traumatized not merely by defeat, but by the nature of that defeat. Petty Officer Hiroshi Nakamura was rescued after Yudachi's sinking. He provided particularly detailed testimony. "We trained for years to serve aboard destroyers. We believed ourselves superior to any enemy. Then came the small boats so fast they seemed unreal. They appeared from nowhere, struck, and vanished. We could not fight them effectively. This violated everything we understood about naval warfare. Many men who survived engagements requested transfer to other duties. They could not accept continuing service where they felt helpless. The Veterans Administration conducted extensive studies of PT boat veterans beginning in the 1970s. These studies revealed that former PT boat crew members experienced post-traumatic stress at rates comparable to ground combat infantry. significantly higher than conventional naval personnel. Former motor machinist's mate William Patterson served aboard PT-195 through 15 combat engagements. He expressed the paradox many veterans felt. We were the hunters, not the hunted. We had speed-surprise superior weapons, but that didn't make it easier. Every time we went out, we knew one mechanical failure, one navigation error, one lucky enemy shell could kill us all. The boats were fast, but they were fragile. We lived with that knowledge every single night we operated. The final accounting of PT boat operations must include these human costs alongside tactical successes. The revolution in naval warfare came at the price paid by young men, American and Japanese, who found themselves caught in a form of combat neither side had anticipated when the war began. Their sacrifice, courage, and trauma formed the foundation upon which tactical innovations were built. The boats traveled at 40 knots, but the men aboard them carried burdens that lasted lifetimes. The lessons learned in the dark waters of the Solomon Islands would echo through naval warfare for generations. What began as desperate improvisation against Japanese destroyers' superiority evolved into doctrine that fundamentally reshaped how nations approached coastal and littoral combat. The Soviet Navy studied American PT boat operations with particular intensity beginning in 1944. Soviet naval intelligence obtained detailed technical specifications through Lend-Lease cooperation. By 1950, they had developed the P-4 and P-6 torpedo boats, direct descendants of American PT boat concepts, but adapted for Baltic and Black Sea operations. Soviet designers retained the core principles: high speed through planing hulls, multiple powerful engines, torpedoes as primary armament. Tactics emphasizing coordinated night attacks. They added their own innovations, enclosed crew spaces for cold weather operations, eventually anti-ship missiles that extended engagement ranges far beyond torpedo distance. The Israeli Navy, established in 1948, embraced PT boat concepts out of necessity. Facing Arab nations with larger conventional naval forces, Israeli planners recognized that speed and surprise could offset numerical disadvantage. Their SAR-class fast attack craft, introduced in the 1960s, carried the PT boat philosophy into the missile age. During the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Israeli SAR boats, armed with Gabriel anti-ship missiles, engaged Syrian and Egyptian vessels in actions that would have seemed familiar to PT boat veterans 30 years earlier. High-speed approaches, coordinated attacks from multiple vectors, rapid withdrawal after launch. The technology had evolved, but the tactical DNA traced directly back to those mahogany-hulled boats in the Pacific. The United States Navy itself gradually abandoned PT boat development after World War II. The rise of jet aircraft and guided missiles seemed to make small surface combatants obsolete. By 1959, the last operational PT boats had been decommissioned, sold for scrap or transferred to Allied nations. Yet the tactical concepts refused to die. In Vietnam, the Navy created the River Patrol Force, PBR boats that operated using principles developed by PT boat squadrons. Speed, surprise, and superior firepower applied to riverine warfare instead of open ocean combat. Veterans of PT boat squadrons served as advisors, translating lessons learned against Japanese destroyers to operations against Viet Cong sampans. The modern U.S. Navy's littoral combat ships, despite their vastly different size and capabilities, incorporate philosophical elements traceable to PT boat operations. High speed for rapid deployment, modular weapons for mission flexibility, emphasis on operations in contested coastal waters rather than open ocean. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Frost, a naval historian at the U.S. Naval War College, has spent 15 years studying PT boat tactical evolution. His 2019 doctoral dissertation argued the PT boats prove that in naval warfare, the platform matters less than the tactical employment. Speed coordination and technological adaptation can allow smaller forces to defeat larger ones when commanders understand how to exploit those advantages. This lesson remains relevant regardless of whether the platform is an 80-foot wooden boat or a 3,000-ton steel ship. The National PT Boat Museum in Fall River, Massachusetts, preserves 8 restored vessels, including PT-796, the last PT boat in operation. Museum Director Thomas Doherty notes that veterans from numerous allied nations visit regularly each nation, claiming lineage from American PT boat innovations. We've hosted Israeli naval officers, South Korean commanders, even a delegation from Singapore's Navy, Doherty explained during a 2024 interview. They all come to study the boats that proved fast attack craft could defeat larger vessels. The specific technology changes, but the tactical principles endure. The mathematical reality that enabled PT boat success remains unchanged. Speed and firepower concentrated in small expendable platforms operating with coordinated tactics became a permanent feature of naval warfare. From Soviet torpedo boats to modern missile corvettes, the ghost of those 40-knot plywood boats continues to haunt the world's oceans. The Japanese destroyers that fled Blackett Strait in 1943 weren't merely defeated by a superior weapon. They were defeated by a revolution in naval thinking that recognized industrial warfare favored those who could produce many cheap, effective weapons rather than few expensive, prestigious ones. That revolution, born in desperation and proven in darkness, changed naval warfare forever. The destroyers are gone rusting in Iron Bottom Sound. But the legacy of the boats that hunted them at 40 knots remains embedded in the doctrine of every navy that values speed innovation and the courage to challenge conventional wisdom. The strategic impact of PT boat operations extended far beyond the individual destroyers sunk or damaged. The psychological and operational effects fundamentally altered Japanese naval capabilities in the South Pacific Theater. Between June 1943 and March 1944, Tokyo Express runs declined from an average of 12 per month to fewer than 3. Japanese garrison forces throughout the Solomon Islands experienced severe supply shortages that degraded combat effectiveness more thoroughly than direct Allied attacks could achieve. Admiral Tomoshiga Samejima, commanding the 8th Fleet responsible for South Pacific operations, testified during post-war interrogations that PT boats had made nighttime destroyer operations unacceptably hazardous. The loss rate exceeded our ability to sustain operations. Official Japanese naval records captured after the war and analyzed by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey documented the scope of this impact. From July 1943 through February 1944, Imperial Navy destroyers sustained 17 vessels sunk in actions involving PT boats. 23 vessels damaged, requiring extensive repairs. Average 340 casualties per month from PT boat engagements. Supply delivery rates reduced by 63% compared to pre-PT boat period. The psychological toll proved equally significant. Destroyer crews that had once considered themselves elite surface warfare specialists found themselves retreating from wooden boats crewed by junior officers. The humiliation proved difficult for warriors trained to value aggressive spirit above technological reality. Lieutenant Commander Abe's post-war testimony captured this psychological defeat. We understood intellectually that the American boats had superior speed and weapons, but emotionally to flee from such small craft violated everything we were taught. Many captains preferred death to the shame of withdrawing from these engagements. The Americans had no such cultural handicaps. PT boat crews understood they were operating precision tools, not proving warrior valor. They attacked when geometry favored success, withdrew when it didn't, felt no shame in tactics emphasizing technological advantage over personal courage. This pragmatic approach, married to industrial capacity and tactical innovation, created a weapon system that achieved strategic effects far exceeding its physical size. 4,000 tons of PT boats, the combined displacement of approximately 70 vessels, had neutralized Japanese destroyer forces 10 times their size. Admiral Chester Nimitz, in his final Pacific War assessment, noted PT boats demonstrated that in modern naval warfare, speed and initiative can overcome traditional advantages of size and firepower. These small vessels contributed to victory disproportionately to their cost or numbers. The legacy extended beyond World War II. PT boat tactical doctrine, high-speed approaches, coordinated attacks, emphasis on surprise and withdrawal influenced fast attack craft development worldwide. Modern missile boats operating on similar principles with different weapons trace their lineage directly to those mahogany-hulled predecessors. The Japanese destroyers that fled from PT boats weren't defeated by cowardice. They were defeated by mathematics. The cold equations of speed, firepower, and industrial capacity that no amount of warrior spirit could overcome. In the arithmetic of modern warfare, the PT boats proved a fundamental truth. Victory belongs not necessarily to the largest ships, but to those with superior technology tactics and the industrial capacity to deploy them without restraint. The plywood boats traveling at 40 knots had taught the Imperial Navy a lesson about industrial warfare that warrior tradition couldn't answer. Speed had become the ultimate weapon when properly deployed by those who understood its potential.